Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. A day after India signed a 10-year deal to operate the Chabahar port in Iran, the US has threatened that any entity considering business deals with Iran will need to be aware of the potential risks of sanctions. Reacting to this statement, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar said that this deal will benefit the entire region and people should not take a narrow view of the initiative. So why is this port so important for India and what impact will it have on its trade ties with Iran? Now, let us pull up the map on the screens telling you the significance of the Chabahar port. So if that is Gujarat, this is Iran, and this becomes the closest Iranian port to India. And what else does this do? This actually helps India to avoid Pakistan altogether. This is the Gwadar port in Pakistan. It allows India to avoid Pakistan route completely, take a route through Chabahar in Iran, and this gives us a route to Afghanistan as well. Since COVID-19, we have been utilizing this route for transporting medicines, fertilizers, food grains as well. So it is extremely crucial for India to renew this 10-year agreement with Iran on the Chabahar port. They've also set up an arbitrational tribunal in Muscat. Any kind of issues arising in terms of arbitration will go there. India has also announced a line of credit of $250 million to develop this port further. There will be an Indian company which will work on upgrading this port and operating it as well. So extremely crucial development there, but it's also attracting scrutiny from the United States. Let's discuss this and much more with our guests in the evening. We've got Ambassador Singh, former Indian ambassador to Iran, and also former Indian ambassador to the WTO, Jayant Dasgupta. Ambassador Singh, let me begin by asking you the significance of signing this agreement right now. We were in the middle of the elections. We still sent a union minister for shipping and waterways all the way to Iran to sign this agreement. Do you think the timing is significant?
No, I don't know. I think timing depends not just on India, it depends on Iran. So it has to be mutual convenience. But any agreement with Iran is not always a simple and straightforward proposal, because the Iranians always have multiple games that they play, which involves their proximity to China and Russia, their problems with US, the Gaza war, where they're seen as confronting Israel. So when you get into a deal with Israel, getting drawn into a geopolitical game in which you are sucked in. Then the other thing is, what is the port going to be used for? So we've been discussing it. This is nothing new. We've been discussing it since the time I was ambassador there, 2003 to 2005. The National Security Advisor came to India. And I remember part of the briefing when I was telling Mr. Brajesh Mishra, NSA, I said, we have to be very clear about what is on the table, because we don't want to spend money there and then realize that we are not getting, because port by itself is not enough. You need a contiguous area. You need a place where you can store things. So even if you're feeding things, say, into Central Asia or Afghanistan, you can't be just dependent on somebody else's storage. You need a huge amount of wherewithal with the port to be able to optimally use it. With the Iranians, the problem normally is they will not give you control over anything, and certainly not control over land. So in the process, you will always be dependent on various Iranian entities, very bureaucratic, difficult to deal with. And then they will always mix politics with religion, politics with business. So where business comes in, they'll also see how is it helping them. And then the Chinese are very much in play. They will play the Chinese against us. Don't forget, the Chinese have a long-term agreement of almost $300 or $400 billion, which they have promised to invest in Iran over the next 2 odd decades. And the Chinese are interested in Gwadar, which is just 200 kilometers from Chabahar. So they will pretend to be interested in developing Chabahar, but they will also be keeping an eye on how it impacts Gwadar, because Gwadar in Pakistan is the end point of CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And that is also feeding Afghanistan and Central Asia. So we are trying to bypass it. The Chinese would be keeping a very close eye on this. And the Iranians have a tendency to play one country against the other. And what the Chinese bring on the table, India can't compete with. They have a much bigger
Right.
uh, trade relationship. They can buy much more oil. They're less concerned about sanctions. So, it's not an easy game that we are stepping into.
And they can definitely put much more money on the table. Let me get in Ambassador Dasgupta as well. Ambassador Dasgupta, if we speak about certain points that were raised by Ambassador K.C. Singh in terms of the Chabahar port lacking the required infrastructure, do you think this new deal covers and addresses those aspects, the new investments being made by the Indian government through the port company IPGL, the investments that will be made by the Iranian side? Do you think that takes care and addresses those questions?
I entirely agree with Ambassador Singh that this is just the uh, starting of a long journey. And we have to see there would be many obstacles, including U.S. sanctions and the paucity of money from coming from the Iranian side, and then the very important point which Ambassador Singh has mentioned about the Chinese uh, promising 300 to 400 billion dollars over the next decade or 2 decades, and they would try to stymie the development of the Indian part of the project in Chabahar. As it is, the Chinese are already there in the Chabahar special economic zone, and they have a deep abiding interest in ensuring that India does not gain much of a foothold there in Chabahar. Now, having said that, the issue about Chabahar is, of course, opening up the Telaram Karanj route to Western Afghanistan from Chabahar. That is one point. The second point is that there is a small place called Saraks, which Ambassador Dinkar Srivastava has mentioned. He was also ambassador, I think, succeeded Ambassador Singh uh, in Iran. And that Saraks is in the northeastern corner of Iran. It is at the tri-junction of Iran, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan. And it is connected by rail to Turkmenistan. And Turkmenistan is again connected to many of the Central Asian republics by rail. So the missing gap is between Chabahar and Saraks. If that railway line could be constructed, despite all the obstacles that I have mentioned, and then there could be a smooth flow of traffic. That is one option. The second option is, as matters stand today, the Iranians perhaps want to make it a part of the international north-south transit corridor, which they have entered into with Russia. So that involves transporting the goods to Bandar Abbas, and from there to Bandar-e-Azali on the Caspian Sea. And then it crosses the Caspian Sea into Astrakhan, which is on the southern border of Russia. And from there is a rail
Right.
link going all the way to St. Petersburg.
Okay, so Ambassador K.C. Singh, how do you think we can make sure that we utilize this route more effectively and diplomatically make sure there are no hurdles between India and Iran in terms of utilization of this port? You've yourself said that Iran would like to play China against India. How do we avoid such a situation?
Let me first explain what Ambassador Sengupta is saying, that the north-south corridor, I was in Tehran when that had become operational. We ran into a number of problems. One was the Iranians they hiked up the charges when you take a container off in Bandar Abbas, and then also the charges for transporting it to the Caspian. Again, very high charges for putting it on a ship. Then the container would go to Russia, and the Russian mobsters would take over and they would extract the money. And then the most difficult problem was that there is imbalance of trade. Now, you can't be sending containers up into Russia with very few things to come back, because all you need is oil and gas from Russia. Now, therefore, the containers would get stuck in Russia. Now, if the containers get stuck there, how are you going to keep sending fresh containers? Now, till you address this basic problem of imbalance of trade, and that has got worse after the Ukraine war, because now even there will be hurdles between Russia and Europe as far as moving products is concerned, particularly once the Americans see that the Russians are going to benefit from this. They would put all kinds of hurdles in combination with the EU. on those products moving on into the European sector. Therefore, it's not that simple. The Russians and the other one they're trying is no, we will go through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and all overland. The minute you have multiple countries, the geopolitics comes in. There's instability in one part. They may not even be the same width of the railway line. You would require some transshipment. So these are all good in theory, but till they are fully tested, I think Chinese have tried a railway line all the way to Europe, which is the east-west line. And apparently the justification for us going ahead with the Iranians and what we tell the Americans, would tell the Americans is, we are countering the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese. Now, to what extent that works, we don't know, because the Chinese are going on a different route, which is more east and west.
Right.
So now, although one thing is they have an Americans say, you see, last time we got an exemption from the Americans for Chabahar, because we argued we are only sending humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Then, of course, subsequently, Afghanistan moved under the control of Taliban thanks to the Americans walking out. Now the Americans don't have the same interest in Afghanistan that they had earlier. So we don't know what their game is. So we will know what the game is, but probably the one saving feature might be that we have a standalone company. So if they want to sanction a company, let them sanction the company which is there. It may not impinge the rest of India's shipping links with the world.
Right. Very important points there, Ambassador K.C. Singh. And I just want to press on the US point a little more. The US ambassador in an interview recently said there might be a clarification of the United States as far as the status of Chabahar goes. But the State Department was very clear that there is no exemption for Iran, no exemption for Chabahar at this juncture. So do you feel that if India invests in the Chabahar port, extends any kind of money or operates this port in any way, there would be sanctions, Ambassador Dasgupta, or do you think the US would wait and watch?
Well, in 2017, Ambassador Singh is absolutely right. In 2017, President Trump was there, and we got a special exemption for Chabahar to be used as a gateway to supply through Western Afghanistan, because favorable government was in power in Afghanistan in those days. Things have changed, but there is growing influence of China in Afghanistan, and India, being a strategic partner of the US, has to explain that India's presence in Central Asia as well as in Afghanistan is going to be ultimately strengthening this strategic partnership. So the State Department has issued the same kind of hard message when President Ibrahim Raisi visited Pakistan, of Iran visited Pakistan last month. And they have just repeated the same thing. But we have to talk to the Americans and explain that this has got nothing to do with Iran's stance on Hamas, on the Houthis, on the other Hezbollah militias, and its continuing animosity, the fight with Israel. This has got to do with trade, and it is not really confined to Iran. It is looking beyond Iran towards Afghanistan and the other Central Asian republics. And it is going to countervail in a small way, perhaps at the moment, because we are not going to invest as much as the Chinese have promised. So it is going to countervail the Chinese influence in these areas.
All right. We've completely run out of time, but I'd like to thank Ambassador Dasgupta and Ambassador K.C. Singh for joining us on the program. That's been an important, interesting discussion on the Chabahar port. So clearly there are a lot of hurdles on the way, and the China angle that we'll also have to be very careful about. We're heading into a short break, but coming up, Russian President Putin was on a 2-day state visit to China. Putin and Xi Jinping have expressed alignment on many issues and are looking to deepen their partnership. A discussion with former Indian ambassador to Russia, DB Venkatesh Varma, when we return. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. Red carpet was rolled, trade agreements were signed, and a sweeping joint statement was made by Russia and Chinese presidents on their consensus on a host of geopolitical and trade issues. Vladimir Putin's two-day state visit to China was a striking show of alignment between the two countries. The two leaders have pledged to deepen strategic partnership in the backdrop of ongoing Ukraine conflict and US hitting China with fresh tariffs. You cannot have it both ways. White House issued a warning to China, saying it can't expect closer ties with Europe and also engage with those threatening Europe's security. Putin and Jinping exchanged handshakes and a rare hug in the capital, Beijing. The video of the two leaders hugging each other is also widely being shared on social media. Let's decode the optics of this visit with Ambassador DB Venkatesh Varma, former Indian ambassador to Russia. Ambassador Varma, thank you very much for joining us on the program. How do you read the body language this time around? Before the war began, both leaders had said that this partnership knows no limits. But do you think there are constraints and certain cracks in the relationship now?
Well, President Putin's visit to China soon after his inauguration, I think is symbolically important. Of course, the proximate reason was the 75th anniversary celebrations of establishment of diplomatic relations. But President Putin is also returning a favor of President Xi when President Xi visited Russia soon after assuming the office for the third time. So there is a personal chemistry there, and it's quite extraordinary for President Xi to initiate a hug. He's never done that with other leaders before. Going beyond the optics, I think Russia and China have been moving closer together. The political alignment is very close. They are not allies. But definitely the economic relationship has reached a plateau. There have been no major announcements on the economic side, especially in the energy sector. I think this goes to prove that the earlier statement that this was a relationship with no limits was obviously an exaggeration. The real world is very different, both for Russia and China. Russia is with its back against the wall in Europe. It has a continuing war in Ukraine, though it is prevailing, but there is no early chance of success on the battlefield, though it is gaining the upper hand. For China, the conflict in Europe is not the same conflict it faces elsewhere with the United States. Russia is totally now cut off from the West, from Europe and the United States. China has a conflictual but a deepening engagement both with Europe and a conflictual engagement with the United States. So President Xi and President Putin are differently placed, but they see a common driver, a common interest in working together on certain specific issues, though their ability to deliver on each other's interests is not the same. It is,
right.
But it is quite an extraordinary visit and a very important global development.
Ambassador Varma, what I'd also like to ask you, that would China like to be seen as the only country in the world bankrolling Putin's war? Because they are also coming under the West, are coming under pressure from the West for sanctions. Is that a worry in China that they will face sanctions if they keep supporting Russia?
See, geopolitically, China has had a good 2 years in the last 2 years since the commencement of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia, as I said, is on the back foot in Europe, fighting the Ukraine war. The United States is an overextended global power. So China can pick and choose how it plays Russia on one hand and how it plays Europe and the United States on the other hand. You would recall President Xi was in Europe on a European tour. The United States has initiated a number of tariffs, which almost amount to sanctions on certain sectors of the Chinese economy. But the Chinese ability to negotiate with the West is far stronger than the Russian ability to influence Western decision-making, unless, of course, it prevails decisively on the battlefield in Ukraine. And that has not yet happened, though it is, as I said, gaining the upper hand. So to say that Russia and China have similar interests, I think is misplaced. China has placed it very carefully. It has benefited from discounted oil and energy commodity exports from Russia. It has benefited from the supply of dual-use items, but it has been careful in its banking relations with Russia. It has also been very careful in supplying lethal arms to Russia, because it definitely needs to maintain a balance between its relations with Russia and with the West. Whatever it is, China has all the cards in its favor rather than with Russia or with the United States. So that is something that we need to note for our own calculations going forward.
Right. Ambassador Varma, there was a 7,000-word joint statement by the two leaders. What were the key economic and military takeaways, according to you? Or do you feel Putin did not go back with as many wins as he may have wanted to?
Well, the 7,000-word document can be summarized in 2 points. It is an extraordinary testament against Western domination as perceived by Russia and China. It is also offers not a complete view, but an alternative view of how the international system should be run. And the main point that both Russia and China are united about, they have a common position on that, which is the establishment of a multipolar world, which is a code word for diluting American power, American and European power on global affairs. It is not just in military and political terms, it is also multipolarity in cultural and civilizational terms. So the split that they see more from Russia than from China with the West is fairly substantive and fairly deep. Having said that, again, the ability of Russia and China to deliver on the joint statement is not the same. There are different powers with different interests. There are also powers with different capabilities and ability to influence the international system. But one particular point I think is very clear. The United States intends to take on Russia and China as part of what is called dual containment. This summit in Beijing formalizes Russian and Chinese intention to take on the dual containment of the United States. Now, this is a completing of the circle of the process that began in 1971 with the Nixon-Kissinger visits to China, where the United States aligned with China to take on the then Soviet Union. And today, Russia and China are aligning themselves, though they are not military allies, on taking on the United States. Of course, their answer is that they are only responding to what the United States intends to do. And that, of course, will have grave implications for our own Indo-Pacific strategy.
Right. And what would be your view in terms of how India should see this situation unfolding after the elections? Once the new government is sworn in, what will be the challenge that they are going to face?
Well, the world is in considerable upheaval and turmoil. The old formulae and old frameworks are breaking apart. So there's a lot of flux. The new government in June will have to hit the road running. I think that India is extremely well placed. Our diplomatic record of dealing with the international crises and conflict in the last 2 years has been of a very high standard. We have stable political leadership. We have a strong economic fundamentals. We are willing to engage with a broad spectrum of players. We've seen that in the G20 summit. There are a number of important meetings coming up. There is, of course, the BRICS summit, the SEO summit, the G20. Prime Minister has been invited to attend the G7 summit. There is a Swiss peace conference coming up in mid-June. And going forward, I think India will be required to show diplomatic flexibility, but also pragmatism in dealing with a very troubled world. India's credentials are very good, but these need to be backed up with credible power. And going forward, I think both economic engagement, trade engagement, energy engagement, not just by us, by the government, but also by our companies dealing with international crises going forward, I think is hugely important. We cannot afford to be passive recipients of global forces. We need to reach out into the very troubled world to see how we can shape political processes, how we can shape markets, how we can shape technology linkages and supply chains. So I think the diplomatic agenda is full, but I'm very confident that India will put its best foot forward.
Right. Ambassador Varma, thank you very much for joining us, summing up the Russia-China meeting for us, the significance and also the challenges and what's on the plate for India once the elections are over. Thank you once again for being with us. That's all we have time for on Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.